as I mentioned, I had Scott Horton on the show recently, and we had mentioned that the Libertarian Institute, which of course was Scott Horton's creation, along with a few other really great people like Will Grigg and Sheldon Richman, they have their annual fundraiser going on right now. Of course, this is the institute that is produced Enough Already and Fool's Errand, has Scott Horton's new book, Provoked, coming out, which I'm so excited for everybody to read, because I don't know if you've got an advanced copy, but it's just incredible. I'm sure you have. And of course, your fantastic book, Domestic Imperialism, was published by the Libertarian Institute. Of course, Tom Woods, if you guys are familiar, if you remember when I debated Chris Cuomo, the book that I gave him was Diary of a Psychosis by Tom Woods, that was also published by the Libertarian Institute. Just an incredible organization. If you can give money, this is like the best thing to give money to. So anything else you want to say about that, and then we'll get into the episode. But what do you have to say about the Libertarian Institute?
Anyone who makes a donation can get any of those books as a gift. My book, Domestic Imperialism, is also one that you can get there. But I love Tom's book. It is full of tons of empirical evidence, principled arguments, and Cuomo's best argument was just to call you Legion of Skank like 6 times. He goes, if I get it in a 7th, maybe this will really take Smith down. But when you're armed with Tom Woods' COVID book, nothing is able to compete against it. So yes, Scott Horton, very wealthy in knowledge. However, when it comes to monetary wealth, Scott and I do need funding for our next books. I'm working on 2 more myself. We have a Waco project in the works, constantly trying to hire people so we can be the libertarian educational website. So you can go to our search engine, type in minimum wage, Winston Churchill, agricultural subsidies, and get the libertarian position on those. Progressives say, we want to give you a free education. By that, they mean tens of thousands of dollars a year, or they'll property tax you and then give you a complete shit education. We actually want to provide a free monetary cost education at libertarianinstitute.org/donate. Please go there to help us out.
Yeah, isn't it so weird? By the way, just as you brought this up, I'm not even like I wasn't planning on talking about this, but isn't it crazy that, as for me, I'm a little bit older than you, Keith, maybe a year or two. But I remember when kind of when I was a kid, it being somewhat plausible that you're like, hey, you need an education. And maybe you need some help financially paying for that education. And it is so wild. I was just talking to my wife the other day, and we're talking about our kids who, my kids, I have little kids. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And we're talking about do you think they're going to go to college? And I was like, I don't know. And I guess there's some argument that if one of them really wants to be a doctor or something like that, hey, you have to get this piece of paper in order to be able to do that. But isn't it crazy that not just like what I do on my channel or you do on your channel, but if you really want to be educated, it's amazing how the market has already provided a free education that is better than any state school could have ever imagined. Like more resources than when I was a little kid. And like no government school could have possibly said, I have every book that's ever been written, and I have a lecture on that book by the smartest person, like breaking down exactly what that meant. Obviously, like in 1985, if you could have said, well, what if I had that? Everyone would have gone, well, yeah, okay, if you had that, then you wouldn't need us anymore. And now we have that, and they're like, no, you still need us because you need a gender studies degree or something like that. It's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, and even if the state coercively funded and taxed people to pay for it, again, still not free. The state paying for it is somehow free. They see it, obviously, when it's like, well, the military spends a lot of money, but then again, it's free because government pays for it. It's like, no, that's money and resources. But even the opportunity cost, 4 years of your life to learn about this bullshit food pyramid and these bullshit mask mandates, that's what they talk to you about. So,
Yeah.
yes, too high in opportunity cost and monetary cost. So, yes, that's why we are building the Libertarian Institute, to not just say the school system sucks, but to create an alternative. And the places you mentioned, YouTube, Odyssey, Khan Academy, Wikipedia, Mises Institute, did I say internetarchive.org? Those places are just treasure troves of private, voluntarily funded educational sites. So, yeah, but we got the arguments for private education as well.
100%. By the way, I'll tell you that I always get asked. My wife literally was just telling me, earlier today, she was like, I think you need to do an episode where you just go through your recommended reading list. Because she manages a lot of my like email and social media accounts and stuff like that. Not my Twitter. My Twitter is all me. I do that. But everything else, you're talking to my wife. So if you send me a message on anything else, you're just sending my wife a message. But that's okay. She'll get it to me. But she was like, people ask about like what your recommended reading list is. And she's like, maybe you should make an episode. And I was like, that is actually a good idea. I probably should do that. But I will say that when people ask that, the Libertarian Institute's list of published books is a great place to start. And I'm not just saying that because you're on the show or because I love you and I love Scott and a lot of people over there. It's genuinely like true. Like Sheldon Richman's book, Coming to Palestine, is an I always recommend that for someone. If you just like don't know anything about the Israel-Palestine conflict and you want to get started, that's a great one there. There's just so many great books that you guys have published. So it's the best place to start your reading list and the best place to donate your money if you can is the Libertarian Institute.
Thank you so much, Dave. Greatly appreciate it.
Okay, so for today's episode, now I'm going on vacation in the morning, and I just recorded with Clint Russell. Now I'm recording with you. I'm trying to get some episodes in before I leave. But what we wanted to talk about today was a speech that you gave, I think, a little over a year ago, and it's called "The State is the Health of War." Now, when you gave that speech, did you realize that you got the order wrong, or was that intentional?
That was intentional. So originally, war is the health of the state was coined by Randolph Bourne. This would have been in 1918 during the First World War. His general thesis is that when a population is terrified of an external threat, that government of the domestic population is able to get away with rights infringements they otherwise would not be able to get away with in a time of peace when people were not terrified out of their mind of an external threat. What I wanted to do is make the case that the way that wars are generally funded, what gives wars their health, is the state's ability to have access to a central bank where they could print money and fund these things without having to allow people to opt out, not to mention taxation. They get to coercively fund their operations. This makes the likelihood of people engaging in warfare much more likely because you're lowering the cost of the people engaging in the activity. Governments frequently have educational monopolies with regard to compulsory education laws, or as Kamala Harris likes to call them, truancy enforcement laws. So when you control the minds of kids, ages 5 to 18, K through 12 in America, they're able to see the state as a much more virtuous organization. So any fights that they're engaged in must be desirable. They must be fought for virtuous ends. Another thing that's unique to states, which makes war more likely, is the ability to conscript and force people into fighting these wars. Of course, they think they're so cool. They brag about, forced cotton picking is immoral and I'm against it. It was 150 years ago, but I'm taking a stand. And even though no one's asking me to take a stand on this, but Vladimir Zelensky enslaving all men ages 18 to 65 to fight in his military and get their limbs blown off so we could make sure that he stays on the throne in Kiev. Well, that's not immoral. That's unfortunately just something that has to happen. And then finally, there's a blatant legal double standard when it comes to states that are allowed to engage in mass murder without almost ever fearing that they themselves will go to jail. General Curtis LeMay famously said to Robert McNamara during Operation Meeting House, the firebombing of Tokyo in March of 1945, that, if we lose this thing, we'll all be tried as war criminals. McNamara tells the story in The Fog of War. So knowing that they won't face any legal repercussions, those are the 5 reasons states are much more likely to engage in warfare than other organizations. And my general solution is to privatize security. We could talk about that at a different point.
Sure. No, and McNamara, of course, went on to be the defense secretary during the Vietnam War. So I guess he did learn some lessons from that conversation. But isn't that interesting to think about? Just that right there, that had America lost World War II, or had America lost, the Vietnam War, it's a little bit tougher to see a scenario in which we're like kind of totally dominated. But that we clearly could have been tried for war crimes, and that like our people could have been held, like, the Nuremberg trials could have happened to the United States of America after World War II, or after Vietnam, or after Korea, or after Iraq, or any of these. And what really would the arguments have been against that? It would have just been like, well, we thought we were going to win. And by the way, if you actually listen to the Nazi arguments in the beginning of the Nuremberg trials, that was essentially it. We thought we were going to win. So it would be okay.
Well, there's an amazing part of The Fog of War where McNamara, I'm working on a transcript for this, so the book right here, McNamara says, proportionality should be a guideline in war. Killing 50% to 90% of the people of 67 Japanese cities and then bombing them with 2 nuclear bombs is not proportional in the minds of some people to the objectives we were trying to achieve. He has these numbers because he was collecting statistics in 1945 for the U.S. military. So this is why historical narratives are so vitally important, because the narrative is, well, America was attacked out of the blue for basically no reason at Pearl Harbor. So look, don't bug me with any of this. Killing Japanese civilians is bad. They started it. As if the people getting killed in Operation Meeting House in Hiroshima were involved in Yamamoto's decision to attack Pearl Harbor, whatever. Okay, you're a psychotic collectivist. Either way, the Pearl Harbor story is a complete myth. The best evidence for this, there's a number of things. Probably the best evidence that Pearl Harbor was actually intentionally provoked is Secretary of War Henry Stimson. There are a collection of reports on the Pearl Harbor investigation, focusing on Admiral Richardson and Admiral Stark. And on page 177, Stimson actually said on November 25th of 1941, the president, Roosevelt, brought up the event that we were likely to be attacked perhaps as soon as next Monday, for the Japanese are notorious for making an attack without warning. And the question was what we should do. The question was how we should maneuver them into the position of firing the first shot without allowing too much danger to ourselves. Realize this was Roosevelt's policy, and we didn't find it out until 1972 when the British War Cabinet papers of Winston Churchill were finally released to the public. If you look up an article by the New York Times, this would have been January 2nd, 1972. It's called War Entry Plans Laid to Roosevelt. And Churchill and Roosevelt are meeting in August of 1940, and Churchill says the president was sure they could come in. The president was going to be more and more provocative in hopes of engaging the Germans or Japanese. Everything was to be done to force an incident. We can also know this is true because after Pearl Harbor, it wasn't, oh, I'm so sorry, I meant to keep us safe. Government did not uphold our end of the social contract. So we're going to return everyone's tax money because that's why you have to pay, because we keep you safe. So if we don't hold up our end, we got to give everyone refunds. No, there was no apology. There was give us more money, more power, and now we get to kill with impunity. So realizing the Pearl Harbor myth is so important because the lack of empathy people have for mass murder, arguably genocide. Tucker can't even bring it up without getting hassled by the Daily Wire crew. Is just terrible. And then the nail in the coffin was in 1999. Robert Stinnett published a book titled Day of Deceit, where he cites the McCullum memo. which says, I don't know if I have that here. The last line in this memo, written in October of 1940, says, if by these means, he lists 5 things that the U.S. could do, Japan could be led to commit an act of war, so much the better. At all events, we must be fully prepared to accept the threat of war. So the state did not have the incentive to keep the peace. The state is the health of war and had every incentive to provoke an incident, to justify a mass murder campaign, knowing their social status and power would drastically increase if the nation was involved in war.